Chapter 5, Carbohydrates Screencast 3. This screencast is going to be the role that carbohydrates play within the body. Now, when we look at our major energy-yielding nutrients, so we look at carbohydrates, we look at lipids and fats, we look at protein, the underlying role of carbohydrate overall is a primary source of energy. Now, another really important reason that we want to make sure we have adequate carbohydrate is to make sure that we have enough energy for functioning normally and we don't have to go into protein stores to get that energy. Lipid is going to be an energy storage form. Now, another really important reason to have carbohydrate in our diet is to prevent ketosis from occurring. And we'll talk a little bit about that, especially when we move on to lipids. Now, when we talk about carbohydrates that's not digestible, they also play an important role in maintaining the overall health of our GI tract. We kind of talked before the roles associated with fiber with regards to preventing constipation and diverticular disease. We talked about the impact of soluble fiber on reducing blood cholesterol levels, and also its impact it has on helping to regulate blood glucose levels. So once again, kind of diverse role, but overall, when we look at digestible carbohydrate in particular, it's about energy. Now, when we look at the energy that's necessary, our red blood cells and the central nervous system, they rely entirely on glucose. They cannot use anything else. As I noted previously, the other thing that's going to happen here is sparing protein from use as an energy source. Now, amino acids from dietary protein are needed to build body tissues. Now, the problem here is if you do not consume enough carbohydrates, amino acids are now going to be used to form glucose that the body needs through a process of gluconeogenesis. So we tend to refer this as protein sparing. And so that's one of the biggest reasons why it really is important to make sure that an individual is consuming enough carbohydrate. In those situations, you're not going to have to use protein to generate energy. Now, when we talk about ketosis, carbohydrates are needed for the complete breakdown of fats. Now, if consumption is low, we're going to see a decrease in the release of insulin. Then the fatty acids from adipose tissue are released to provide energy for the body. Now, because there's not enough carbohydrate available, those fatty acids are not completely broken down, and there's going to be a byproduct formed from that process of ketone bodies, and that's where we see the state of ketosis. Generally, when we see a state of ketosis, we see it in untreated diabetics or poorly controlled diabetics. Also, there are a number of diets. You've heard of the keto diet, and there's a number of other diets that are low carbohydrate and high fat, as far as Atkins and the South Beach diet. So all of those are responsible or create a state of ketosis in the body. Now, here we look at the large intestine. There's an image on the right, the colon, and what you can actually see are these little pockets. These are diverticula. Now, fiber, importantly, is critical to bowel health. It adds bulk to our feces, and what this actually does, it prevents a number of situations. It prevents constipation, hemorrhoids, diverticula causing diverticular disease, and when we look at diverticular disease, generally these pockets are asymptomatic. Now, if these pockets become inflamed, then we look at diverticulitis, and that can be an emergency situation. We've also seen that one of the things that indigestible carbohydrates might be able to do is reduce the risk of colon cancer. And this could be due to nutrients commonly found in high fiber foods. Now, if we look at some other reasons why indigestible carbohydrate is important, we know that it reduces the risk of obesity, it absorbs water, it's going to expand in the GI tract, and that creates a feeling of satiety or fullness. If we look at being better able to control blood glucose levels, soluble fiber actually slows down the absorption of glucose, and this in turn will decrease insulin release from the pancreas. we're also going to look at how soluble fiber reduces cholesterol absorption. So we're going to see less absorption and also the reabsorption of bile acids, and this overall results in a lower cholesterol level. Now, the next couple of slides are looking at carbohydrate digestion and absorption. So we're going to see a series of slides here that are going to be models for what we'll see in the future. Now, when we look at the first place where digestion actually starts, a lot of it actually takes place in food preparation. One of the things that cooking is doing is going to soften the fibrous tissue. If we also look at starch granules, they're going to swell as they soak up water, and that's actually going to make them easier to digest. So cooking on its own is the first part of actually looking at the digestion of carbohydrates. Now, this particular diagram, I want to spend time walking us through this because this really is going to be something we see for all of our other energy yielding nutrients. So let's just walk through the numbers. So the first here, and we're specifically looking at how this relates to carbohydrates and their digestion. So first, it begins in the mouth for starch. We have within our saliva salivary amylase, and that actually is responsible for breaking down starch into maltose. Within the stomach, salivary amylase is actually inactivated by the low pH of the stomach, so no further digestion is going to occur within the stomach. Now, when we look at the pancreas, now remember the pancreas has two major roles. One is as an endocrine organ, and the other is as an exocrine organ. So we're now looking at the exocrine function, and pancreatic amylase and dextrinase, they're going to be secreted into the small intestine, and they're going to break down polysaccharides from starch into disaccharides. Within the small intestine, now the small intestine is the primary organ of digestion and absorption. Enzymes in the wall of the small intestine are going to break down the disaccharides into monosaccharides. Now, the liver is going to, the absorbed monosaccharides are transported to the liver, and this is going to be via the portal vein. Now, the large intestine, some soluble fiber that is metabolized into acids and gases by bacteria in the large intestine, and then the rest of insoluble fiber will be escaping digestion and is excreted as feces. So we can actually see basically walking through carbohydrate literally from mouth to anus. Now, absorption, this is an active process, and we're going to be looking specifically glucose and galactose, and we're going to look at a diagram that kind of looks at this. One of the things I want us to remember, because once again, Bio 145 is a prereq for this, and when we look at some transport mechanisms, okay, and so we look at sodium linked, and so we're going to be revisiting sodium linked transport because that is going to be tied into pumping, okay, the absorption of glucose and galactose. Fructose, on the other hand, this is actually absorbed by facilitated diffusion, and this has a much slower absorption than glucose or galactose. Some fructose is going to be converted to glucose in absorptive cells. The rest will actually be converted in the liver. Galactose is converted to glucose in the liver, and then glucose will be sent to cells for use. Liver will store any extra glucose as glycogen. Now, if glycogen storage capacity is exceeded, that glucose is actually going to be converted to fat and stored as adipose tissue. Now, this slide here, I want to spend some time because it's talking about the active absorption of glucose in the small intestine. So the first thing that I want to do is get our frame of reference. That's always the first thing you want to do when you look at a diagram. So here what we're looking at is the lumen of the small intestine, and notice what's circulating. We have low concentrations of glucose here, but a high concentration of sodium. So let's take a look at what's happened. So this is the microvilli, okay? And then what we're going to see here primarily, as sodium moves down its gradient, it's going to fuel the pump to move glucose against its gradient into the absorptive cell of the small intestine. Now, then what's going to happen here is that glucose will actually diffuse out of the absorptive cell and into our blood capillaries. Will be circulating as blood glucose.